Right, can I welcome everyone to the Scrutiny Committee, and particularly welcome Mike White, who has replaced Councillor Mike Dirk on the committee. We're going to go through a roll call of people who are present. Just before I do that, can I ask you to keep your mic muted until you're called to speak. If you wish to speak, please use the hand on the device, or if you haven't got the hand, send me a message using the icon on the screen as well. So let's go through who we have present first. If I call out your name, could you please unmute and then confirm if you're present or not? This is for the record. So Cyril Anderson.
Present, Chair.
Thank you, I'm here. Wendy Fitzgerald.
Here.
Thank you. Louise Gibbard.
Yes, present. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Joe Hale. No sign of Joe yet. Okay. David Helliwell.
Present, Chair.
Terry Hennigan.
Present, Chair.
Peter Jones. Peter, are you here?
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Erica Kirshner.
Yes, Chair, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy Lewis.
Present.
Gloria Tanner. Are you here, Gloria? Can you unmute and confirm you're present?
She's here just now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, present, Chair.
Thank you, Gloria. Will Thomas. Will's not present yet, I don't think. Mike White.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. And then the co-opted members, the statutory co-opted members first. David Anderson Thomas. Can you unmute, David, and confirm you're here? David Anderson Thomas, are you here?
Move on.
David is showing us present, but he hasn't confirmed this. Alexander Roberts. I don't think Alexander's here. And on the councillor co-opted members, Chris Holly.
Here.
Paxton Hood-Williams.
Present, Chairman.
Lyndon Jones.
Present, Chair.
Jeff Jones.
Yeah, present, Chair.
And we have support officers, Bridge Madahar.
Present,
Are you
Chair.
here, Bridge?
Present, Chair.
Debbie Smith.
Present.
Deputy Monitoring Officer. Kate Jones, Democratic Services Officer.
Present.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate. And then we got the invited members. We got Councillor Rob Stewart, Leader of the Council. You're here, aren't you, Rob? He was here a minute ago. Yeah.
Present, Chair.
Phil Roberts, Chief Executive.
Present, Chair.
Martin Nichols, Director of Place.
Present, Chair.
Ben Smith, the Chief Finance Officer.
Present, Chair.
And Craig Gimlett, the Corporate Health, Safety and Wellbeing Manager.
Present.
Craig here?
Present,
Okay,
Chair.
excellent. Has anyone I've missed at all? Anyone present who I've missed? No? Okay, thank you very much. In that case, we'll move on to the next item, which I believe is disclosures of, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence at all, Bridge or Kate?
Apologies, Chair.
Do we have any apologies? None.
No apologies, Chair, no.
Thank you very much. In that case, any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interests? I shall take that as none. Anyone want to declare?
Chair.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah. My daughter works for social services, so I declare an interest in that, and I've got permission from Standards Committee to speak.
Thank you very much, Chris. Anybody else? No. Okay. In that case, we'll move on to the next item. Anyone want to declare they've been whipped or party whips is telling them what to do? Prohibition of whip votes? No, I didn't think so. Minutes of the last few. We got 3 sets of minutes to approve. So we have minutes of the 9th of March, which should be on your agenda. So I'll take this through page by page. On page 1, page 2, and page 3, and page 4. Are we happy there's a correct record? I shall take your silence as consent unless someone says something different. Minutes of the special. Yeah, okay, thank you. Minutes of the Special Scrutiny Programme Committee of the 24th of April, which is on page 5 of the agenda, and then page 6 and page 7. Are we content there, correct record? Okay, and then finally, the minutes of the 4th of June on page 8. Are we happy with that? Lovely, thank you very much for that. In that case, right, we go back to the agenda. Do we have any members of the public who wish to ask any questions? We've got public question time here. No, I'm going to take that as no. Okay, in that case, we're going to move on to the main item of the agenda, which is item 6, the council response to COVID-19 pandemic. And can I welcome Councillor Rob Stewart, leader of the council, and Phil Roberts, the chief executive, ably supported, I think, by Martin Nichols and Ben Smith, who are going to do a quick presentation for us. So I'll hand over to you, Rob. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And we've prepared a short presentation just to logically run through those key areas of actions and work that the council has undertaken to respond to the pandemic. Perhaps if I can start by putting on record again my thanks for all of those council staff, volunteers, key workers, the NHS, and obviously councillors and others, chief executive and this corporate management team who have worked tirelessly throughout this crisis to make sure that obviously we protect our communities and we support the responses to the COVID crisis. So just to place on record again, my thanks, Chair. In terms of the, if we can go to the next slide, please, in terms of the just outlining how we've operated during this period, because obviously normal structures have been somewhat suspended, and obviously lots of the stuff that the council would normally do has either had to be suspended or done in a different way. So what we're showing here on the slide is, if you look at the red box in the centre, we've convened an executive control group, which is made up of senior politicians and senior officers, which links out to regular updates to the wider cabinet and senior management team. There have been updates on a regular basis to the other group leaders. And that has allowed us to move forward and make sensible decisions as a council, make speedy decisions where necessary, but keep as many people involved in that decision-making process as possible. Below that, then obviously we've got the brown box, which is the logistics command, and that command has run a number of key services, perhaps in a different way, but making key decisions operationally in terms of social care, the care hubs, community support services, public protection, and emergency repairs and other work that is needed to be carried out. And then at the top of the screen in the three grey boxes have been the, if you like, the key upward communications to the Welsh Local Government Association, which has met 3 times a week initially and now meets once or twice a week regularly. We've had regular meetings with Welsh Government ministers and officials, myself with many of the ministers and Phil as chief executive with many of the officials. And then obviously we've been linked in with our partner organisations, specifically the Health Board and Public Health Wales. So that's the, if you like, the operating model that we've used to make decisions during the crisis. So if we can move to the next slide, Phil. Just in terms of headlines, just to update the committee, around 4,500 staff have moved to work from home. And again, that's been a real success in terms of us quickly using the agile working program that we had already rolled out across large parts of the authority to help people to work remotely from home. And I think that's been a real success during this crisis. In addition, 221 members of staff have been redeployed to other services and 300 staff repurposed. So again, you know, we've had to introduce new services that didn't exist prior to COVID, where we've asked staff to pick up and to do other tasks. Obviously, some of our services, especially the non-essential services during this time, have been hibernated. In terms of essential services, we've run around 60 school emergency care hubs in school settings. We've run free school meal services, and they've taken different forms over the period of the pandemic. I'll come back to that in due course. Social care packages of care have been received and reviewed. Sorry, have been reviewed for many people out there. So again, given that we wanted to protect people in their homes and to limit the potential for the spread of virus during this time, again, limiting the amount of time people go into other people's homes has been necessary. And again, Dave Howes and the team in social care have done an excellent job to review those care packages, obviously keeping the support in place where it's needed, but reviewing it where it's able to be changed. We've recruited an extra 140 social care workers, and of course they are available to us to help with the additional demands that are currently in place in social care at the moment. And we've reopened or opened 2 additional care centres to help us with greater capacity for care for social care people needing care from us, care services from us. In terms of PPE, we've done a lot to bolster the PPE supply chains, and we also have established arrangements to support PPE supply across the whole of the Swansea Bay care area. So that includes supply to Neath Talbot, and Swansea's taken the lead on that. Risk assessments have been undertaken on all key roles operating in the council during this period, and as we've started to remobilise our services, we've now got a very well tried and tested risk assessment process which we've agreed with the unions. Obviously, it's not gone without note that Martin Nichols and the team have done a hugely proud job of creating that 1,000-bed surge hospital over at Bay Studios. I'll come back to the metrics on that in a minute. We've established extra emergency homeless provision, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute as well. Food supply and distribution networks to vulnerable people in our communities. We've recruited over 1,400 volunteers to help run those networks and help support people in communities. And again, my thanks go to those many thousands of volunteers who've not just registered with us, but are working in their communities every day. We've also created a shielding support service and a dedicated helpline, and that's to help with food and medicine deliveries. We've got local area coordinator networks with local area coordinators in every area of the county of Swansea now, which we didn't have prior to the crisis. And they've been hugely helpful in terms of supporting communities. And just on the finance side, we're working with Ben Smith's team. They've done an amazing job in getting out over £47 million worth of grants to businesses, some 3,700 businesses across Swansea. Rate relief worth 35 million is also going out now to businesses across Swansea. So that'll be around £82 million worth of help that the council has helped get out to businesses to support them through this crisis. And of course, recovery plans are being drawn up at this time. We're not able to share those recovery plans in detail with you today, but I can assure you that work is well underway to prepare for that. Obviously, part of it being the potential reopening of businesses in the city and in the county, subject to Welsh Government announcement later this week. So Phil, if we can move to the detailed one. In terms of the Surge Hospital, again, it's an amazing achievement by the guys. Swansea Council Building Services led this delivery of this hospital. Kia and TRJ were appointed as the major contractors and operated in collaboration with Swansea Council Building Services. As I've said before, Martin Nichols and Nigel Williams and the team there have done an outstanding job and should rightly be praised for it. So we had up to 400 trades on site on a 24/7 basis during the first 30 days. They literally did not stop. And I know a number of the committee members have visited to see what's been created over there. And Chair, I'd like to offer the committee the opportunity to visit as soon as they can in a safe manner to see what's been created there, because really any pictures we could show would not do that facility justice. The first 500-bed phase was completed within the first 35 days. And just to be clear what that meant, it was designed, procured, contractors set up, and all of the necessary elements put in place, the trades procured, with the build completed and handed over to Health Board within the first 35 days. That, something that would have taken years took a matter of weeks. And when I said it was a wartime effort, I really meant it. Full completion in less than 90 days. We think the estimated cost at the moment is somewhere between 12 and 15 million. And I know Mr. Smith is working to finalise those costs. And we've had positive discussions with the Health Board, and we do expect those bills to be paid in the coming weeks. Special thanks also go to Roy Thomas for being so helpful in making sure that we could use that site and get the work done quickly. That was really helpful. The Surge Hospital thankfully hasn't had to yet take any patients for treatment of COVID. And that's a testament to the fact that the people of Swansea and the people of the Swansea Bay area have followed the guidance and avoided that massive peak that we were anticipating early days in this crisis. So people have helped us to save lives, and people have helped us to keep people out of hospital. And that was always the plan. However, we are proposing to use the facility to start antibody testing, and that will be available to social care workers and to teachers, or teachers that have been manning the care facilities over the recent months. And that will start, I think, tomorrow in terms of our antibody testing. And obviously longer term use is being considered, because this isn't just a tented temporary hospital. It is a full hospital in a building within a building. And we hope it is something that can be used to help the health service longer term. But that decision is for the Health Board and for Welsh Government to make. Next slide, Phil. Just in terms of social work, as I said, 140 extra staff secured as part of our social care effort. 1,500 hours of extra care have been made available to community care. The 2 locations at Scrutiny and Redesign have been reopened. 140 beds brought online to help with additional social care provision. Packages of care being reviewed, as I said, to limit unnecessary external contact. And that's really important around, obviously trying to protect those vulnerable people who may be getting home care, etc. PPE, we're in a very robust position. We've got over 500,000 items of each of the PPE elements of PPE care, PPE provision in stock at the moment, and we've got robust supply chains in place. And again, thanks go to Nigel Williams and the team for making sure that happened. And again, we supply or can supply PPE not just to our own care homes, but we supply to NPT and to the independent sector as well through the arrangements that Swansea Council has set up. So again, another very, very successful venture during this crisis. And of course, we're offering support where it's needed to the independent care homes. In terms of supporting key workers, you'll know our schools were repurposed into emergency care centres, 60 locations opened across Swansea. Teachers and teaching staff manning those facilities throughout the crisis. And again, our thanks are recorded to the teachers and teaching staff for doing that. The school care facilities were designed and in place within 3 days of the lockdown being announced, which is, again, a fantastic effort. Initially, we had free school meal grab and go bags for families to collect. We then changed that to food box deliveries as the pandemic progressed. And then we finally moved to a mixed food option where you can get either a food box delivery or you can get a backs payment of £39 per 2 weeks into your bank account. That is more than is available over in England, because obviously in Wales we also provide some money for school breakfasts. So it's a higher payment that's available to free school meals parents at the moment. And again, thanks to go to all those that have helped run and manage that service during the pandemic, because it's been truly fantastic effort. In terms of supporting vulnerable people, there's been many elements of this in our community. The food supply and distribution network that was established, and the council has stepped in to support and expand the existing food bank network that was there originally. Some of our third sector partners had to step away because of lack of availability of staff and food items at the start of this, so council had to step in. In terms of our shielding programme, 8,500 residents within our boundaries are identified as part of the shielding programme. We've obviously been offering support to them, as well as 2,800 residents getting food box deliveries on an ongoing basis. And we're currently around 500 food box deliveries per week. So that's where we've got to in terms of the provision at the moment. Obviously, the local area coordinator network, that's worked exceptionally well supporting volunteers and other networks locally, supporting councillors locally to help people in their communities. We've had medicine collection and delivery services established, volunteer shopping services established, and obviously the supermarkets have now launched volunteer cards. You know, the post office is offering money withdrawals in a safe way. So again, the council and the local government has been at the forefront of all of the local services here, making sure people stay safe, secure and supported in their homes. And a dedicated helpline, of course, is there. The 636363 number is obviously there now to support people should they need help. And again, just to say, those call centres, that dedicated helpline, has all been set up remotely and has worked remotely to support people. And again, it's about the council adopting very quickly new methods of working and using technology to support people in their homes. In terms of the homeless, you'll know we had in Swansea a very proud pledge of always a bed, which we used over the Christmas and winter periods. So that was still in place prior to the pandemic. But working with Welsh Government, we were able to expand the emergency provision at the start of lockdown, getting many homeless people into B&B accommodation. There's about 70 to 75 people in emergency accommodation at the moment. But of course, as we've learned over many years, despite all of our efforts, there are always people who will refuse the help that is there. And on average, there's been about 3 to 6 people either new to the city or known to us who have refused the emergency help despite it being available. We've also opened T. Tom Jones, and at currently there is homeless provision there. 9 households have already moved in. 3 special isolation properties have been made available within our homes estate for people who will need to isolate. And support for the asylum seeker programme has been provided as well, with over 100 families or individuals being based in the city. And again, the Grand Hotel has been very helpful to us in terms of helping provide the necessary accommodation available to the Home Office, which we have worked with in Swansea to support asylum seekers. Most of those have now moved back out of the city, but were supported during the early days of the crisis. And we're already, as you know, Andrew Lewis has been leading on the Housing First programme. And again, we've got 20 households identified for that Housing First programme to help people long-term homeless get out of homelessness and back into being supported and being able to live in homes independently. So that programme is going really well. In terms of the numbers in terms of people who've either been infected or have lost their lives during this crisis, again, the figures are generally reported on a health board footprint, not on a locality footprint. And of course, just to say before I go through the figures, we won't know the full numbers of people who've been affected, because obviously that is down to the coroner providing a confirmation, or the health worker, whoever the responsible person is, providing that in terms of registering of deaths. But at present, we can state through the national figures that we've got an average of 518.5 people per 100,000 population, and that's one of the lowest rated positive cases. So it is a positive in that respect. And again, that's testament to people following the guidance and limiting the risk of infection across the area, but also actions that we've all taken together to try and prevent infection wherever we can. 1,278 cases have been confirmed as of the 12th of June across our area, and regrettably 219 people have been confirmed as having died or presumed to have died from COVID-19. Around 15.3% of tests have been found to be positive, and again, that's lower than other population centres. To date, as of the 12th of June, 8,353 tests have been undertaken, and you'll know that we've set up testing at the Liberty Stadium. That provides for on-site testing, but also for additional capacity for people to drop off tests that they may have had delivered to their homes or through the post. So the capacity is higher than that. As I mentioned earlier, antibody testing will begin tomorrow, or today, sorry, or yesterday, whichever that date was. I think I'll lose my days. But antibody testing is beginning yesterday for education staff and frontline staff. And obviously mobile testing units are available in care homes, and that has been established and is working effectively. Just to say, on our care homes, all of our care home staff and residents have been tested, and that retesting will be repeated on a regular basis. And just if I draw your attention to the numbers there, sorry, Phil, just before we go on, the numbers on the previous slide, you'll see that the spike in terms of infection and death rate was during that mid-April period, and you'll see a significant drop-off of deaths there shown in the graph since then. But of course, we must remain vigilant, and whilst all the indicators are looking more positive at the moment, and the R rate in Wales currently is between 0.5 and 0.7, which is really good. It's the lowest nationally in any part of the UK. There is obviously a risk as more restrictions are lifted that R rate will climb again. And what everybody wants to do is to avoid a second peak of this virus or a second wave of this virus. And that's in our minds when we take any decisions in terms of reopening up. Just quickly then on test, trace, protect, because this function, which the council are supporting health boards across Wales to deliver, is really important in terms of us allowing services to reopen up. But where we see infections or new infections coming to the fore, we're able to trace people and isolate them very quickly. So obviously we've set up 4 teams already to allow us to help the health board in tracing people who they've identified as testing positive. And we will have 8 teams live by July the 1st. We're using a digital first approach, but at the moment numbers are very low. We've had about 17 people referred as of last week into that testing program, and we are successfully tracing people as a result of that. Just to say, in terms of the guidance at the moment, so everybody's clear, if you are identified as potentially being positive with COVID, you get tested. If that test comes back positive, then obviously you and all of your contacts have to isolate. If your test comes back negative, then you do not have to isolate and your contacts are released. But if the contacts of the person who's tested positive then get a test, regardless of the outcome of that test, they have to still isolate for that 14 days. So there is a difference between the person being tested and identified and those people who are being traced and testing and isolated. And there is a rationale for that in terms of the medical advice around how long the virus is in the body before it shows itself, etc. So again, we continue to look at the guidance with Welsh Government, but it does mean that there are impacts of testing and tracing that are probably not well known and probably will become more prominent as more and more of the economy and more of the services open up. And then just finally, in terms of costs, just to say, in terms of the budget that we have, Mr. Smith may say a bit more on this later, but we flexed our budget that we set in just March this year, which seems a lifetime ago now. Revenue was flexed, so variances in revenue has been by over 100 million, capital by around 15 million plus. We've obviously used reserves, and we've used the established earmarked reserves, capital equalisation reserve, to help especially with the building of the hospital, the Surge Hospital in Bay Studios. We are making claims to Welsh Government for reimbursement on a monthly basis, and Welsh Government have already confirmed 78 million there for helping authorities across Wales with lost income and other costs in the first phase. We've had a number of announcements from Welsh Government in terms of grants that have been made available to support social care and other aspects. And again, officers are tracking those coming through. But we need to remain vigilant. So whilst we're relatively comfortable that we know what we've had to spend, we put that to Welsh Government. Welsh Government have made some decisions to help with cash flow and to help with reimbursement of costs. We'll need to continue through that because we're not out of the crisis yet. And there's still other impacts, specifically the ongoing costs of test, trace, protect, which we will need to monitor, because at the moment, the staff being used for test, trace, protect are our own staff redeployed. But of course, as services reopen, we will need to reallocate those staff and to recruit potentially into that service, because that is a service that is likely to continue for many, many months to come. So that was my my sort of racehorse run through of the slides. Chair, perhaps before we go back to the committee for questions, perhaps I could ask the Chief Executive or any of the other officers if they wanted to add to anything I may have missed.
Yes, Chair, if I could make a couple of comments. I think the leaders covered very rapidly what's been a very difficult 3 to 4 months. And I've put on record at various meetings my thanks to all the members of staff who've gone beyond, done things that they were never employed to do in terms of learning new skills rapidly, etc. I haven't thanked, and I must thank the back office staff, because everyone forgets those staff who keep the organisation running in terms of ICT, finance, HR, etc., legal, all of whom have supported the entire effort and gone beyond, really, because some of the decisions we've had to take are at a pace that makes people uncomfortable in local government, but have had to be taken rapidly for obvious reasons. I have to thank the management team, who I'm in the unusual position of having to instruct them to take leave, because none of them have taken leave for 12 weeks. And that includes weekends. They've had the odd day here and there at the weekend, but they have worked tirelessly. And of course, the last person I should thank is the leader. I haven't thanked him at all in any meeting or in any other forum, because at times like these, leadership is the single most important thing for the city. So on top of what has been done in terms of the leader's description of everyone's efforts over the last few months, you can't help, if you live within a 5 miles radius of the city centre, you can't help but notice that the city hasn't stopped. The direction that it was heading in beforehand has continued apace. And I think that's a really important note, because the public are getting fed up. They're getting fed up of being stuck in the house. They are fed up of reading about nothing but COVID, and every other report that you see on television is about it. And I think they need something to give them optimism. So it's the leaders' drive and commitment to what's happening in the city centre that I think I'd reinforce. I don't know if Martin or Ben have anything to add, but I suspect they'll be answering questions, Chair, along with myself and the leader. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Martin, Ben, do you got anything you want to add to it?
Nothing from me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Can I just, Martin, do you want to add something or no? Okay. Can I just, on behalf of all the committee, actually just record our thanks to all the staff, the management team, to the leader and everybody who've really gone way and above beyond the call of duty to deliver this this response to what is a major national crisis. I think we all appreciate the work that's been put in, and the hours that's been put in by everybody as part of that. And I think it's right that we should record that. We had a discussion about this in the pre-meeting, and I think it was right that everybody wanted to have that recorded on behalf of all the councillors here present, to thank everybody they've done, and also to thank all the volunteers as well around the city who've also helped us with that. And there've been, I think, hundreds of volunteers who've done exceptional things, and the way the city's come together as a community has also been exceptional as well. So I just want to put that on record on behalf of the committee as well, if that's okay. In terms of questions, we've tried to divide this up into some sort of logical order. So I'm going to go through the pre-arranged order. I'll announce each section as we come to it, and then see if anybody wants any questions on that. The first section is actually on the local picture in relation to the spread of COVID-19 in Swansea. That's largely been dealt with as part of the slides. I'm just wondering, has anyone got anything, questions they want to ask, particularly about where we are at the moment in terms of how COVID is impacting on the city? If you can indicate either by your hand or send your message. I'm going to give you a few more seconds. Okay, I think that was well covered as part of the presentation. So I'm going to move on then to emergency planning arrangements and management of the strategic response, work streams, etc. I know that Councillor Jeff Jones had a question on this one. Jeff, if you want to come in.
Yes, it was only really something I read in the paper with regards to Neath and Port and Carmarthen, to do with, joint resilience and so on. I noticed they seem to follow, a gold or silver command structure, and we seem to have been actually working as perhaps a single entity. know you actually mentioned the WLGA and the Welsh Government, but I was just wondering, really, why did we go down that road? And it seems to have worked out, but I'd like some comments from you, please.
Jeff, yeah, if I come in on that one first, look, just to say we've had similar structures in place in Swansea. So what I've described to you here was the internal council structure. There were other command structures for gold, silver and others established with the health board, key partners and others. And maybe perhaps, Chair, you might want to bring either Chief Executive or Craig in to answer that question. He can describe those in a bit more detail for you.
Yeah, Craig is already in the case he wished to speak.
Yeah.
Craig, do you want to come in?
Craig, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we have got the internal structures, but we are also part of the South Wales Local Resilience Forum, which sits as a strategic command group and a tactical command group. Now, I'm part of that strategic forum, but Neath and Batalba also has representation within that group, because that's the overarching governance under the Civil Contingencies Act, which is the legal requirement. And health are the lead agency for pandemic, but that's the management structure. So our organisation, we formerly had a joint resilience unit, but we now have our own emergency management unit and have had for a number of years servicing just Swansea. And thankfully, we did have that in place moving into this pandemic and crisis. Does that answer the question?
It does actually,
okay?
because I thought
Yeah.
we actually had acted perhaps outside of that, but you've and it wasn't clear in the slide, so.
No, not at all. It's an alternate to that. That was our internal model, because I sit as part of that executive control group and as part of various other structures within the region and in support of health. I've been that conduit into that SCG, that senior coordination, strategic coordination group, which also involves Welsh Government and other key partner agencies, the police and the blue light services. So that was part of our information flow into that governance structure and into that national governance structure as well.
Okay. You okay, Jeff? Anything else? Or
No, fine on that.
okay. Has anybody else got anything you want to ask about the emergency planning structure or the arrangements? No, in that case, we'll move on to key activities, actions taken, including implementation of measures prescribed by government and support the shielding list vulnerable persons. I know Peter Jones wanted to come in on this question as well, and relating to asylum seekers. Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to repeat the congratulations that you have given on behalf of the committee. I think the performance of Swansea Council has been absolutely outstanding, and I know from personal experience here in Scrutiny of many of the benefits of that work. My particular interest during this whole COVID-19 process has been with the necessary support for asylum seekers and those with refugee status here in Swansea. I've been working very closely with the Scrutiny Park Community Food Bank, together with my wife, as it happens, because we've got close associations, particularly through my wife, with the Swansea Support Group for Asylum Seekers. And we've now built up a considerable number of people on who have come to rely on us for weekly or fortnightly food and other essentials over the period in question. And I noted the leader referenced asylum seekers, and I was very happy to see that. But one thing we found with asylum seekers that they have particular needs in terms of diet, the kind of foods that they want, support packages. Many have babies or very young children, so we've been supplying them with nappies, with other support, even toys appropriate to children of their respective ages. I just wondered whether the leader or anyone else is able to comment in general about the position of asylum seekers and refugees in Swansea during this process, because they are a desperately needy group in terms of the very poor financial support they receive from central government. They can't afford to travel. They often don't have the means to travel independently. By the time they've met their rent costs, in the case of refugees, they've nothing left. It's a very desperate situation. So I'm grateful for what the council is doing, but I wondered if there was anything Rob or others wanted to add on this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rob?
Thank you, Peter. I'll bring perhaps the officers in to say a little bit more, but just to say, look, from a political point of view here, I mean, as you say, I'm really proud of the work that you've been doing down in Scrutiny there with the community, and I know it's been replicated across Swansea. There have been some real challenges in supporting asylum seekers. Some examples would be in terms of the free school meals system, for instance. Many of the asylum seekers don't have bank accounts themselves or weren't able to accept cash payments in certain ways. So again, we've worked with the Home Office, and again, we agreed last week a system whereby the Home Office would add that payment in. So again, we were able to overcome some of the, if you like, the legal and technical barriers that had previously been in place, which restricted what we could do to help asylum seekers. We've obviously, as you say, as you know, as I reported in the slides, gone over and above in terms of making and working with businesses or hotels in the city centre to secure additional provision so that we could take additional asylum seeker families and individuals and help them and support them during the crisis before they moved on to their new location. And, you know, I think we'd all like to get to a point, Peter, whereby you know, the support networks that are currently in place are not needed anymore. And even outside of a pandemic, you know, we'd want to get to a point where we don't need food banks anymore. You know, that's an awful blight on a civilized nation, that people still need food banks. So I think our aim is to make sure the services remain for as long as the pandemic is here and for as long as people need support, but then to try and eradicate those problems that underpin poverty so that we can get people back to be self-sufficient, so they don't have to rely on food banks or other issues. One final thing I will say, I know Martin and the team there, in terms of the food box delivery, obviously have amended the food boxes, have worked with some of our different communities, because obviously Ramadan fell right in the middle of the crisis. And of course, we've taken account of religious beliefs and religious needs during the crisis to try and support people in a way that works for them. So again, I think you know, the guys and the services done a remarkable job to support asylum seekers and various communities across Swansea. But Martin may want to say a little bit more, Chair, about the detail in terms of some of the changes.
Martin, you got anything you want to add?
Yes, just briefly. I think, as the leaders indicated, and Councillor Jones as well, I think some of the key aspects around, particularly the food delivery, and whilst we wouldn't be wanting to rely on the need to be delivering food and particularly emergency parcels to our most vulnerable people, the fact that was available and was able to be flexed to reflect the individual needs as far as was possible at very short notice, in terms of large numbers of crisis packs that were being issued as people had absolutely no food. I think it was a huge asset to be able to supply that, and it was across the whole city. It was disproportionate in various areas, of course, but all areas have benefited from that service. And I think, as the leader has said, it includes the faith requirements as well as asylum seekers and refugees as well. So it's providing that holistic support, with many of the signposting come from ward councillors who have identified a particular problem and then referred it on to our team, who've been able to help, which has been greatly appreciated.
Peter, do you want to come back, or are you happy? No, you're not coming back, are you? Jeff, you want to come in?
Sorry, I'm coming back. Just to say,
oh, sorry,
yes,
Peter.
I'm very grateful for the responses from the leader and from Martin. And I'm glad, I mean, I know the council does recognise particularly asylum seekers as a special needy group, and I'm grateful for the work that the council has been doing to ensure that their needs are met as best as we can. Thank you.
Okay, before I bring Jeff in, I just wanted to say that certainly in terms of the emergency food resource we set up in Mantleton, we've came across quite a few asylum seekers. So I think a lot of stuff has gone on as well, in addition to what the council's done. My question, though, has there been any issues with no recourse to public funds? I think that was relaxed, wasn't it? But is that going to be a problem for the future?
Chair, I don't know the updated position, but I know it's been a matter of debate with the UK government, and it came up at PMQs. I don't think it's become a significant issue for us locally. We've had other workarounds, but I know that Martin might be able to say a little bit more about that.
Martin, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just going to say, sorry, I'd have to come back on that one. I don't know the answer to that today.
Okay. Jeff Jones, you've got a question.
Not a question, yeah, well, a good question, really. Yes, Mary and I have been involved with the Scrutiny bank as well. And we've been perhaps amazed at the extent of the need for food banks. But really, looking to the future, with the number of people that, when this furloughing actually finishes, I see the number actually increasing quite dramatically. I'm a little bit worried with regards to the resource needed to actually meet this possible demand.
Councillor Jones, I share your concerns on that. Look, Welsh Government have been quite clear. Let's deal with it in sections. In terms of homeless people, Welsh Government have made a pledge, which we're very happy to support and work with, is around no return to the streets for those people who were homeless previously. And we're working to try and make sure that Swansea is a place where we try to eradicate homelessness. In terms of people who may have, as you say, either been furloughed or be in financial difficulty coming out of the crisis, or lost their job and may have gone on to universal credit and other benefits. Well, there's already indication of that because our free school meals eligibility numbers have gone up from, I think, the 4,000 mark to about 7,500. That's just during the crisis. Now, we suspect while some of those families will then move back into employment or back to work or out of furlough later on, of course, for a number of people, they will have lost their jobs during this crisis and won't have a job to go back to. So that ongoing economic concern is there. And again, our aim would be to continue to support these services, to support people. But of course, we can't do that unilaterally. That is something that it needs to be handled at national government level, because any council will not have the resources available to it to do that long term.
Good, thank you.
Okay, I briefly saw that Ben Smith had his hand up. I don't know were you going to reply to my no recourse to public funds, Ben, at all, or you just thought about it?
It was only very briefly, but just to indicate that where there have been a few sticking points, we have worked very, very flexibly to ensure that services that need to be provided have been provided to avoid any issue of cash being handed over until solutions have been found. So I'm not aware of anything that has inhibited our ability to do the decent and right thing for people who have been in desperate need.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for that, Ben. I noticed that the report that's just gone to Welsh Government on homelessness recommends that the UK government should actually do away with no recourse to public funds, but we shall see how that pans out in the future. Wendy Fitzgerald, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just a question around homelessness, because I think the leader said in his presentation that there were some refusals of accommodation. Did he say between 3 and 5? I didn't make a note of it, which suggests to me that there are still people who are homeless. Is that actually the case? And if we are going to have a situation where there are going to be no homeless people, where are the supposedly homeless people who have refused accommodation during this epidemic going to be accommodated?
Well, I think you've got to remember that homelessness is not a static position. People become homeless. People become homeless all the time for a number of reasons. I mean, people may be fleeing domestic abuse. People may be in a situation where their business has failed. They've not been able to pay the bills. They've become homeless. There are lots of reasons why those numbers change all the time. The point I was making is, as a council and as a government, what we're trying to do is to make sure there's always more provision than there is need. What we can't do, though, is absolutely force somebody to take the help that's on offer, because many of the people who will be homeless may have issues with drugs or other issues that stop them becoming able to take on a property or be self-sufficient in a home. And that's where the Housing First programme that Councillor Lewis is leading is so important in getting at those hard to reach people. I would share, again, I won't go into too much detail, but for Councillor Fitzgerald's benefit as well, there are people known to us who don't, even though the offer is there to stay in a property, don't want to stay in a property. They have conditions that prevent them often from being comfortable within a property, and they prefer to stay outside. Now, it may seem odd to people that is the case, but again, they're very low number at the moment. They are known to us, but of course, people arrive in the city all the time as well, who may be homeless. So what we need to do is, as I've said before, have that really wide safety net So if people come into contact with third sector agencies, with any of our services, we can identify them as homeless as quickly as possible. We can look to support them, and with the help of Welsh Government, make sure there's always more provision than there is need, and that's where we need to get to.
Okay. Phil Roberts wants to come in on this issue, I think. Is it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think you're as familiar as I am with this, given your dealings with homelessness over the years. It's a sad fact that this has always been the case. It's not just the case in Swansea, it's the case in most major cities, that despite the attempts that the outreach teams make, some people do not wish to go into housing. It's important in those, and I think the leader touched on it with the Housing First model, that proper wraparound support in terms of mental health services, substance misuse services are targeted appropriately. But there is a proportion of the population, albeit tiny, 3 to 6, which are the ultimate pinnacle of hard to reach. It doesn't mean to say we ever stop trying to reach them, but we, like other cities, have not succeeded in cracking that hardcore because people actually refuse the offer of perfectly good housing. It's just a fact for those who work in homelessness. The other thing I would say during this discussion on homelessness is that we've worked really closely with the Welsh Government, and actually one of the things we did was we invited their officers in to see what it's actually like on the front end, dealing with outreach and rough sleeping. And I think it's been a really valuable thing for them because for policymakers, they don't always see the actual impacts of the decisions that they're making at the sharp end, so to speak. So I think they've learnt a lot. And I look forward, Chair, to that filtering through to further debate and decisions around homelessness in Welsh Government, because I think sharing that information has been hugely valuable.
I would like to be a fly on the wall there, Phil. Terry Hannigan. Terry, are you coming in?
Yes,
yeah.
I've come across it quite a lot myself, even down to the fact where the mental health comes into it, but also I've got 1 or 2 gentlemen who refuse to sleep anywhere other than under the floorboards of usually derelict houses. That is just the kind of situation where people, they do not want housing, they want to be left alone. But there's certainly, I agree with what's being said, accommodations being offered. Some people will turn around and say they want to live in a certain place, which, as we know yourself, you can't pick, it's a point situation. And that is a situation we're in, and there's not a lot we can do about it. Just keep doing the hard work that's been carried on, even as far back as Housing Options days when Phil Roberts was there.
Thank you for that, Terry. Right, I'm going to move on to partnership working. And I know Councillor Mike White has a question on this as well. Mike? Are you there, Mike?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, what I'd like to know, perhaps, Leader, obviously, you know, with the agencies that we want to have in partnership working, is it possible we can bring on board businesses, and if possible, can perhaps a task force be set up so we can pull everything together, so everybody's going at the same speed in these areas of service?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. In terms of if you're talking about recovery plan and making sure that businesses are prepared and that we are ready to recover the economy, yeah, that work is already ongoing. We're working on recovery plan at the moment. We're working on remobilisation plans, and that's at local level, regional level, and at national level. We've already got good work going on with BID in the city centre. Obviously, we await the Welsh Government announcement on Friday morning around what restrictions they propose to lift. And we are anticipating some movement on those non-essential businesses, which the Welsh Government has said they may consider reopening if the R8 allows. We're also expecting the Welsh Government to make a trailing announcement on what the next 3-week review could focus on, and that will help us again to prepare. We have some really good effective structures already in place with businesses in Swansea, and it is something in terms of our recovery plan and the need to take that forward as a council and for us to publicly lead that. Yeah, so whether it's a task force or whether it's a series of bodies that help on certain things, we're definitely looking at that at the moment, and it's certainly something we're considering, Mike. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you, Leader.
Okay, I noticed we put quite a lot of money into businesses, though the slide said business supper, I think when it meant business support. Is that all that money is being reimbursed, I take, from the Welsh Government? So we're not actually having to put that up front, are we?
Yeah, so the business grants are released in phases. So we've had a couple of chunks of that released at the moment, and there is a further release due, but that'll be done on need. And maybe Mr. Smith can say a bit more about that if you need to dig into the detail. And yes, all of the other funding that we would be pushing out the door to businesses is money that the Welsh Government either have already sent us or will replace.
Okay, Ben will be pleased to know we're coming to a special section of resource and finance shortly. Jeff Jones, you've got a question on the City Deal programme, I think, on this.
I think you caught me unawares there, Peter. You know, I can't remember.
You were going to ask how the crisis affected the City Deal programme, I think.
Yes, go on then.
Leader.
Well, I'm very happy to answer that one.
Yeah, I thought you would be, yeah.
No, I mean, as the Chief Executive referred to in his kind comments, I mean, the work in the city centre for everybody to see whether it's on our schemes or on others has continued at pace. And of course, the arena project has really continued to progress, and we remain largely on track for that City Deal project. Planning obviously approved the 71 to 72, the Kingsway project. And again, we hope to be on site now at the early part of 2021 and open 2022 for that part of the City Deal. We had a discussion with Trinity St David's and Swansea University on the other projects which we are linked into with them, and again, positive progress is being made on those. And you'll have noted that the Pembrokeshire Dock Marine got its final approval from UK and Welsh Government last week, which is a great boost for Pembrokeshire and the region. And the HAPS project, the Homes as Power Stations project, which is worth some 505 million, received its final approval from the Joint Committee, and now will go to the government's via a 3-day review for final approval from the government. So, in fact, I think given that many areas of government have been able to work remotely and focus on business, I think we've made some really good progress in terms of the approvals and the business cases for the City Deal itself, as well as physical construction and delivery of the project. So there hasn't been an impact, and I can report as well, the really good news is that the ministers have confirmed that all City Deals and Growth Deals funding is unaffected by the COVID crisis and funding is secure. So again, that's welcome news, not just for the Swansea-based City Deal, for all the City and Growth Deals across Wales.
Okay.
Perhaps I'll, just like to say, I welcome the good news there. Perhaps I was just going to comment with regards to scrutiny of the City Deal. With the coronavirus epidemic, we've not met for quite some time, either locally or regionally, and I'm well aware that the scrutiny function is, or shall we say, has been resourced out to other projects through the City Deal. And I'd welcome really, and I know we're going to discuss with Bridge really. Hopefully, we'll have a meeting in the near future to have a more in-depth assessment of the City Deal. But I welcome the good news.
Yeah, well, Councillor Jones, I'd welcome that. I have no control over scrutiny, and nor should I.
No.
But I have said to the regional chair of scrutiny, Councillor James, that if he calls us to a scrutiny meeting, and Neath Talbot Council support the regional scrutiny for the City Deal, that I and the other members would be quite happy to attend the scrutiny meeting when it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're also trying to get a meeting of the panels before the annual meeting in council as well.
Yes.
So,
can I just ask one? Sorry, Peter. Just ask one thing. I know we had a little bit of a delay with regards to the release payments for the City Deal. I think it was £1.5 million per annum. Are they still releasing that monies now as they should do?
Yeah, so we've got a further release of money due now following the approval of the Pembrokeshire Dock Marine. But of course, as you will be aware, we've committed to meeting in full all of the requirements of the independent review. Part of that would have been the appointment of a managing director for the regional office. That has now taken place. We've agreed at the Joint Committee last Thursday the new staffing structure for the Joint Committee, so they will begin the recruitment now of resources into that central office to create the program management office. In addition, Jonathan and his team there have been working hard on the program business case, because we've got the project business cases, but we need that overarching revised program business case, and we're on track to submit that to Welsh and UK government by the end of June, and that will allow us then to draw down further funding for the city deal. So again, we're on track to the plan that we've previously looked at in terms of meeting the requirements of the independent review. That in itself will then trigger the release of further funding to the city region.
With regard to Swansea, we've actually had 2 lots of £1.5 million so far. So
the allocations out to the projects is an item that needs to be agreed by the next joint committee. But the treasurers have been in conversation behind the scenes, making sure that those arrangements are in place. Again, Mr. Smith can comment on this, but Mr. Smith, I believe, is relaxed that the money is going to flow. It's just a matter of it being agreed at the joint committee when the next committee takes place.
I think this is something which you can take up at your next panel meeting, Jeff, and Ben will come back to that now rather than deal with that now. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Right, just before we move on from partnership, one question, Leader. In your presentation, you said you're hoping to have a longer term use of the hospital, which is being constructed on Fabian Way. Roy Thomas has indicated that he's expecting to have it back after 12 months. Have you got his agreement to this longer term use?
Well, I gotta stay on the right side of the lease agreement. I don't want to prejudice any discussions. All I would say is, look, Roy is absolutely right. The lease, as I understand it, for the hospital at the moment is a 12-month period. That's not to say that that couldn't be extended if everybody agreed it was the right thing to do. All I would say is, of course, the investment that's there, the facilities that are there, are not the same as they are for the field hospitals across the rest of the country. This is, by all intents and purposes, a semi-permanent structure. It could be used for many years if Welsh Government and the Health Board and the current leaseholder agreed that position was sensible. So again, all I was highlighting was the fact that, people who've seen the site, I think, have all come away with saying it would be too good a site to lose now, and it would be a real benefit to the health service long term.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're going to move on now to impacts on services, staffing, etc. Jeff, I've got you down here for a question as well in terms of extent of working from home.
Yes, I could see from the slide earlier, you actually mentioned, I think it was 4,500 people actually working from home. I think we've entered a new sort of generation of working arrangements now. Would we expect a lot of those people actually to remain working from home in the future? Have we learned anything from these people actually working from home?
Well, I think it's not just for staff, Jeff. It's for all of us. I mean, if we can get 72 councillors onto a call, then there's no limit to what we can do with technology, is it? But more seriously, look, the staff, like councillors, like many businesses, have taken to working in a different way. There are real benefits to that, because, to be honest with you, I'm not going to travel to Mid Wales for a WLGA meeting and spend 2 hours in a car in future. I'll be using technology to dial in, and again, the benefits to the environment and to the road network of people not having to travel vast distances to attend meetings, and to the productivity that brings, I think we should all embrace. I think it's also going to be balanced, though, with the the well-being aspects of this, because whilst you can work from home 5 or 7 days a week if you need to, is it healthy to work from home all of the time? And I think that's going to be where the deliberation is going forward, is to say, what is the right mix of bringing people into the office and allowing them to work from home? But look, I think home working is here to stay. I think we're not going to go back to what we were doing beforehand. I think that would not be sensible, but it is about finding that right balance, and that'll have benefits for all of us, I think.
Chief Executive, Phil Roberts.
Yeah, I'd sort of underline the leader's comments, and there are some huge benefits, particularly in relation to regional working. I have weekly meetings with all the other chief executives and the WLGA. All our dialogue regionally with the Health Board and MPT is done using Teams now. So there are major benefits, and I think as the leaders quite rightly said, there's environmental benefits in this as well as wasting people's time in travelling. What we do have to realise is two things, I think. First, it's limitations. You can't do child protection effectively over it. There's some things which you actually have to be present for, and that doesn't only include services. Whilst we've run meetings really effectively over Teams, there are constraints in terms of governance. I think about the council meeting we held, and we had a limited number of items. It's difficult to deal with public questions, and if you don't, it's not a political comment, but part of this is the polemic of debate and discussion between members, which is part of the democratic process. And it's, you know, I think face-to-face works better with that, if I may make that comment. If we're moving to a more comprehensive homework, you know, I use the word as opposed to agile, because we're already agile to a degree. If we're moving to that, then you need a different regime in terms of the treatment of health and safety, the support for staff, the way in which productivity is managed. And the corporate management team are in the middle of these discussions at the moment. But I think it's absolutely inevitable that the events of the last 3 to 4 months have fundamentally changed the way in which a large number of people will work forever. I always use the example, I don't want to pick on them, but housing benefits staff. It's extremely easy to measure the productivity of housing benefits staff in terms of the number of claims processed, etc. And to that degree, there is no need for those staff to be in a central point. The final balancing point I'd make is that part of our strategy for the regeneration of the city is that we do need to have whatever staff we have based centrally as close to the city centre as possible. We all know that the issue of footfall is fundamental to the city centre. So these deliberations are ongoing. The leader mentioned earlier the recovery plan. Part of that is about recovering the position we're in. Part of it is not going back to the position that we're in, and making the most of two things in particular. This whole notion of agile working and home working. And the second is, how do we maintain and bolster that voluntary and community and mutual support that there's been throughout the whole process. So this is all part of the recovery plan. But I think, if you wanted a personal view, I think it's changed the way we work forever.
Okay, Martin Nichols, you want to come in?
Yeah, just a brief additional point, if I may, Chair. As part of the sort of lessons learned from this, Jeff Bacon and his team with facilities are speaking to all of the heads of service to make sure that we learn all of the lessons. So what has worked really well, and perhaps what things haven't worked so well, so that whenever the future strategy is put forward, it's based on that evidence from across the council, because there are huge benefits from what's happened. But there have been some challenges as well, and we just need to make sure that when we set what the future operating model is, we take into account of both of those aspects.
Thank you, Martin. While I've got you here, and while we're talking about existing services, one of the big successes, I think, of this whole lockdown is refuse collection. But I think where we're falling down now is on litter. And we're not just talking about people gathering on beaches here. We're talking about litters in the street. We haven't done the litter picking for, what, 12 weeks? Or something, and I know that other authorities are litter picking, like Neath Talbot, for example. I'm just wondering, are we likely to resume litter picking anytime soon?
We have commenced. You're absolutely right. For the early weeks, while the refuse collection was ongoing, the litter picking hadn't recommenced. But we had agreed with the trade unions 2 or 3 weeks back that the full service will resume. It is slightly problematic because with social distancing, not being able to share vehicles, etc., we aren't operating to full capacity. I think it's safe to say that, but we are getting towards that. But as you rightly said, there's quite a bit of catching up to do, and we are looking as to whether we need to supplement that resource, particularly around city centres and town centres and beachfronts, because oddly enough, in this time, there appears to be more litter created by most public when most of it should have been in lockdown. So we are trying to deal with the consequences of that as well. And we're also looking at whether this has identified particularly problematic areas. You know, it's easy to say we need more bins or larger bins, but actually perhaps we need to be a bit smarter with the way in which we make that service available. So that's something that we're looking at, particularly with any technology solutions that we can build into that as well, around bin sensors and other opportunities.
do you have a target as to when we're likely to have a full service back? I'm just saying, because out in the communities, as opposed to the city centre, beaches, etc., the biggest problem is after plastic collection. Manston Road is still covered in plastic, for example. And I'm sure that's replicated all over the city. So I think it's important that we do get that back up and running as soon as possible. Do you have a target date?
We're about 80% capacity now, and that remaining 20% is purely because of the social distancing aspect. So it's going to be difficult to give a date because it depends on when that might be relaxed. But we are changing from last week with a revised risk assessment of the trade unions. We are now changing the ability to share the vans and the tippers, meaning that we can now get up to full complement from this week. But if there are any problematic areas, and I appreciate it may be all areas, by all means flag those up and we'll try and get particular attention to those locations.
Okay. I've been restraining myself because of the various problems, but I certainly will in future. Yes, Leader.
Chair, I was just going to say just to add to what Martin said, obviously, whilst all members, if they spot hotspots, should report them, and we'll do what we can to deal with it, and that's been happening even within the crisis. But again, I would just ask people to be a little bit understanding, because the balance has to be that some services won't return to full capability and capacity because there are still restrictions because of social distancing and other stuff. And as I said, we have a very robust risk assessment process for all roles across the council now, which we go through methodically with the trade unions to make sure if we are bringing people back into work or restarting a service in a different way because of COVID, that service is safe. So again, it's one of those things that for some areas, for a period which we aren't able to say yet, they may not return to the sort of service you saw prior to COVID, because it may not be possible. And that's just the reality of the ongoing impacts of the pandemic.
Okay, that brings me on to the next thing, which is, of course, the receipt of black bags at the various recycling, well, at the Clansamlet, basically. Is that a bit further away? Because I can imagine that's going to have quite a few risks associated with it. So
Martin may want to say a little bit more on this. My understanding is at the moment we're running a practically normal service now across our recycling centres. It's working really, really well. The only thing we're not accepting, as I understand it, is the black bags at those centres. Yeah. But what we have done instead is to make sure that we are working with communities, because of course all of the recycling services are there. So there shouldn't really be a need for people to not be able to recycle much of what they have in their homes. There aren't restrictions on the amount of stuff you can recycle, whether it be garden, paper, cardboard, glass, tins, and other recyclates. And of course, where we have identified a problem, we've spoken to communities. We've been pragmatic with some black bag collections where certain households may have had a real difficulty because they've had a large family, perhaps isolating in the same household, which has generated more waste. But by and large, the compliance levels are very, very high, and people are living within the 3 black bag limit. So there shouldn't be a need to take large numbers of black bags to the recycling centres, and we wouldn't encourage that anyway, because certainly we don't want our staff wading and sorting through black bags at the recycling centres, which of course was the previous service, because you couldn't take black bags there anyway and deposit them. It was a sort facility, and it isn't safe to do a sort facility at this point in time. So that's why the black bags are not being accepted there. But we are being pragmatic where it's needed at roadside collections.
Okay, did you want to add anything to that, Martin? Or are you happy?
No, I'm happy. Well, sorry, just the one point. I think that pragmatism in terms of, I know we haven't formally lifted any 3 bag limit, but certainly the crews are being pragmatic and understanding that people are in difficult situations. So that is working well at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Chris Holly, you wanted to come in. Chris?
Yeah, I just unmuted it. Sorry, it took me a bit of time. Phil and the leader about home working. Obviously, this is going to be a major subject in the none too distant future. As you said, home, we're not going to go back to spending hours going to Llandudno Wells, and we're not going to. And there's also going to be considerably less people coming into the Guildhall or to the Civic Centre. on that, there's going to be a considerable cost reduction for the council in the way in which we operate in future, especially with people working at home. We won't have to worry too much about the heating or the energy consumption within those buildings. And yet that is going to be a major issue for people when they work at home. And I think the unions are going to come forward and say at some stage, hang on now, you want people to work from home, then you're going to have to compensate them. Back in 2005, when BT done the original program about home working, one of the aspects they brought up, and I know Phil has already spoke about it, was health and safety and lone working. And these are issues, whilst there's a massive advantage of working at home, but there needs to be a robust discussion with everyone with regards to lone working, health and safety, and the actual cost of people working at home. And when that discussion's going to take place, it would be interesting if we could come back to a scrutiny board for us to see what has been said about that.
Yeah, Chris. I think, look, as the chief executive indicated, we're in early days of planning around what the new norm looks like, what the new arrangements will be. So I think there'll be plenty of time for us to bring forward some ideas and proposals as those plans emerge. And again, we're happy to look at, no doubt, not just the issues, but the solutions on this going forward. So yeah, very happy to do that, Chris.
I think Phil Roberts wants to come in on this issue as well.
Yeah, yes, because Councillor Holly and I have spoken about this separately in other places, but what the words I used was a different culture and a different regime. The rules around agile and home working are quite different, and it's not something you just switch to lightly. You have to control it, and you have to have a proper plan to roll it out. There are significant health and safety issues, and there's issues of cost, and we're going to have extensive discussions with the trade unions over all of that. I think you can overcook how many people will be working from home, because there's an awful lot of work that we do, particularly in Martin's service and in Dave Howe's service, that cannot be done from home, and there's a huge number of staff who won't be working from there. But we should facilitate it where possible. The biggest benefit and the biggest bonus for me is in relation to the pace and scale of regional collaboration. And actually, I have to confess, because some of you will know, I'm not always the biggest fan of the interaction that I have with civil servants. The degree to which my staff have actually made or influenced the policies and plans of Welsh Government by increased dialogue through remote working is incredible. And actually, it does present a real platform for improving collaboration, not just between councils and central government, between councils and the health service and business partners. So I think we need to build on it, but not in a sort of narrow context that it we're just talking about staff working from home, because as Councillor Holly's pointed out, there are savings to be made there, but there are also, as Ben Smith would probably point out, there'll be costs to it. And as Craig Gimblett would point out, there needs to be checks and balances in terms of the health, safety and welfare of individual members of staff as well. So it's not something we're going to rush into, Chair. And by all means, once we've come up with the details of a recovery plan, I'm perfectly willing to come back and talk about that element of it, because it's important that sort of organisation change isn't achieved easily. It takes drive, leadership and management to make sure that we actually get to the place that we need to. But I for one, am in the same camp as the leader. Much as I love Llandrindod of Wells, Aberyron, Fishguard, Carmarthen, I won't be travelling there in future because all of the other councils are now almost, not quite, but almost as capable as we are on ICT. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Terry Hannigan's been waiting for a bit to come in. Terry? Are you there, Terry?
Yeah, I think the original question was about litter picking. And what I'm going to say is that later on in this meeting, I'm going to, ask a question regarding the volunteers that came on board. I believe there was 1,400. So I can raise what I'm about regarding litter picking when it comes back to volunteers, if it's okay with you, Chair.
Okay, you want to come back to that later, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, if that's okay. Okay, right then. Joe Hale.
Yeah, just to go back to what Phil and Chris were saying about home working, because clearly there are benefits, but there's pitfalls as well. And what Phil was mentioning about the health and safety and well-being of staff. But a really good starting point is to have that home working policy. And I'm just wondering whether we've got an active home working policy now, because the way this used to happen in other areas of the public sector was it was if your manager agreed, not necessarily any sort of policy, but if your manager agreed, you could do it. So do we have a policy?
We do have an existing home working policy, but I don't think it's now fit for purpose in the context of where we find ourselves. So I think, Councillor Hale, that will need to be reviewed as part of the recovery plan. And principally, this whole idea of ensuring that health and well-being of staff that you don't see is a real concern. So when I say a regime and a culture, I mean it needs to be a very disciplined approach to introducing such a programme. Other organisations have attempted it, some have failed, and some have succeeded. So we need to learn from the positive stuff, and we need to learn what not to do by where it's gone wrong. But I think it's obviously one of the opportunities that throws itself up from what is otherwise a purely negative experience. And I think the management team are on the case here. We're working with HR, and Adam Hill is doing a specific piece of work on workforce, which I think we will bring back to members as quickly as possible, because hopefully we will come out of this soon. I mean, there is discussion around second spike and so on and so forth. But we need to be prepared for getting back to normal as quickly as possible, and that's what the recovery plan is going to be all about.
Craig, does Craig want to come in there? Sorry, Craig indicates he wants to come in as well.
If I may, please, Chair, just to offer reassurance to all the members present. I mean, the psychological well-being and the welfare of the staff, not just their physical safety, is always first and foremost in my thinking, as many of you know. Myself and my officers are involved in all those pieces of work, both from the work which is going on with facilities management as far as the numbers returning to the buildings, but also the future policy making, the review of the current agile and home working arrangements to make sure that we are protecting staff, and we're already put arrangements in place for specific chairs to be sort of made available to the workforce that need them. So a lot of piece of work has already gone on this, and a full policy review will be part of that recovery planning. But that's just to offer you the reassurance that it remains cited first and foremost in what we're trying to do to look after the staff.
Did you want to add something to that? Joe, do you want to come back or?
Yeah, only to say it's just been highlighted very recently in other areas that home working was seen to be just something that could be granted. So there was no real policy around in other areas. There was no real policy around many of the pitfalls, such as lone working, such as mental health and well-being. So it's really good if we can get a stream of work where maybe those things will be mitigated for, because it's necessary.
Okay, Rob, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, it was on exactly that point, which is, there are pros and cons of doing this. I think culturally, I think the difference that Councillor Hale explained was previously this was generally by exception and only with permission of your manager. I think culturally we've got to the point now where this has become more the norm. So it's become more the expected and allowed activity that will be built into where people can and want to work from home. And it will become something, as I think, as part of the fabric of how we operate now. So I think that is that big cultural shift. But as you quite rightly say, Councillor Hale, we need to have a policy to make sure that we manage those mental health and well-being benefits of this and concerns against the business benefits of doing it as well.
Okay, Peter Jones, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a personal observation. In my last couple of years working for the RSPB, I had an arrangement whereby I worked partly at home and partly in the RSPB offices in Cardiff. And I was working obviously as a policy officer, working on research papers and things of that kind, desk-based. There are strengths and weaknesses in doing that. The strength is the peace and quiet an ability to get on in one's own time in terms of developing particularly a researched paper. The weakness is not having colleagues nearby to whom you can go and talk and consult and discuss where there are matters that can't easily be resolved without that kind of approach. So it does seem to me that home working, probably stating the bleedingly obvious, depends very much on the nature of the work itself. But there are certainly some activities where, in fact, working from home can be both an advantage and a disadvantage, and somehow that balance has to be met. I enjoyed it on the whole, and I think I probably benefited from it. Whether the RSPB benefited from it, I don't know. But as I say, for some points of view, it's worth doing. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take that as a point rather than the question. I'm bringing Wendy Fitzgerald in. Wendy?
Yes, hi. Yes, really, I think my question has been mostly answered. I was struggling around the health and safety aspect of working at home. I can quite see there are problems with lone working and your mental health and so on, and the lack of your ability to be able to communicate with colleagues. But I'm still slightly struggling with the safety aspect. Does it actually mean if you are home working, there would have to be some additional insurance cover or what? You know, I think these are the kinds of issues that would have to be flexed out if this is going to continue to any great extent in the future.
Are you happy, Wendy, if when they come back with the policy, we discuss all that then? Because I think Craig Gumley must probably agree with you this needed, but we'll need to put that into a proper policy.
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to move on then to resource implications. And I've got Peter Jones first, I think, asking you a question about this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. What concerns me, and I have emailed the leader in the park recently about this as well, we have a pre-COVID revenue budget for 2021. We have a pre-COVID forward financial projection going beyond the current financial year. And obviously, we've now incurred both significant and ongoing additional revenue costs and projected loss of revenue, a pretty nasty combination. So I'm just wondering, do we feel confident that the lost revenue, increased costs are somehow going to be fully met, presumably by Welsh or UK government, or UK government through Welsh government? Is it possible that, like later in the financial year, we're going to have an emergency review of our revenue budget to take account of the changes that are taking place? Thank you.
Chair, perhaps if I answer the political point, and then I'll call Mr. Smith in to give some further detail. Look, my view at the moment from all our discussions is that I expect the majority of everything we've incurred to be covered by the Welsh or UK governments as part of the COVID response. We are in as reasonably comfortable a position as we can be, given everything we've dealt with. As I said in the presentation, we've had to flex revenue budgets by over 100 million, but that means that those are variances to existing budgets. It doesn't mean that we're 100 million pounds down on where we were. That's not what it meant. It means we've changed what we've spent the money on compared to what we plan to spend the money on. Again, working closely and taking advice from Mr. Smith on this, I think we are relatively comfortable. We are working continuously through the WLJ and direct with Welsh Government to try and make sure we put up those cases for costs that we're incurring. And Welsh Government, as I've indicated, have already made a number of announcements in terms of money that will be flowing to us to recompense us for costs that we've incurred or stuff that we've spent money on. I think the one key element going forward is, of course, we will need to look at the medium-term financial plan in terms of the longer-term finances of the council. That's clearly obvious, and that much will depend on what the UK and Welsh Government's response is to the economic crisis that will follow the health crisis that we have. So that obviously has to be factored in. I think in the really near future, though, as I've said, the Test, Trace, Protect system is a new and ongoing service that we will have to manage. That is going to be something that we can resource from within our own staff temporarily. but as we restart services, we will potentially need to recruit, and that Welsh Government will need to fund that additional resources to our council and to other councils. So that is one of the immediate ones I think we will need to look at. I would say on the positive, in the recent supplementary budget, which was laid by Welsh Government, which Rebecca Evans introduced, there were very little changes for local government budgets as a result of the Welsh Government review. I think PSB funding and some small education grants were ones that were discontinued, but they were not a surprise to us, and they are not ones that will cause us an issue by the change to the budget. So as it stands at the moment, as secure as we can be, but obviously Mr. Smith can give you his views.
Ben, how relaxed are you?
I'm relatively relaxed given we are in very unusual times. Just by way of putting a bit of meat on the bone in terms of some of those funding streams, I have to make a distinction between day-to-day cash flow to make sure there's enough cash in the bank every day to meet all my obligations, and also resource cover for the year. That's taking into account ministerial promises and likely sums I am likely to get in from taxpayers who are temporarily distressed, etc. In terms of some of those headline amounts, just to give you a bit of a flavour of the £50 million plus that we expect to finally hand out on business grants, Welsh Government has already paid us 75% of it in cash up front now in the first 2 months. Half of the £35 million business rates relief, which is going to Cabinet on Thursday, has also been handed over in cash. And we have had 3 or 4 slugs of revenue support grant paid in advance to ease our cash flow. The corollary is also true that for the pots of money that the leader has referred to, which come to about another £200 million, those are claims in arrears against time-limited pots. I've put in my 3rd claim, and in total I've claimed around £3 million so far. The interesting thing is that, of course, a number of those promises that have been made are only for the first 3 months or the first 5 months, if they stretch to including free school meals support. And part of that longer term assessment is around what's likely to come later on in the year. My degree of relaxedness is indicated by my intention to report in normal fashion. So that is outturn when it is due to be reported to Cabinet in July. And first quarter the month thereafter. Now, the first quarter report not only reports on the first quarter, but also forecasts for the year. And that is the appropriate time at which stock will be taken of all of the overall pressures, likely grant claims and amounts already received.
Ben, I think about 20-25% of our income is from fees and charges. And of course, there may be an impact as well in terms of council tax collection. Are there issues in terms of our income from those 2 sources at all?
There are. I mean, income from fees and charges is about 25% of the net budget, but it's obviously a much smaller part of the gross budget. Yes, we are foregoing a substantial amount of income, and as the leader has indicated, there is a national pot available from that supplementary budget. There's a £78 million pot for claims for loss of income. No authority's yet been able to access that one. It's one of the later ones that's come on stream. And certainly there are council tax issues. There's a double whammy here. There is council tax not coming in because people are distressed. Now, we've only had 2 months worth of figures. April's were pretty horrid, May's were better, but there is clearly pressure there. And of course, the corollary is, as well as people suddenly in the position they're not able to pay council tax, which is a loss of income, they are also potentially more likely to be eligible for council tax reduction scheme, which is an expense above the line and for which we are only partly recompensed through revenue support grant. To be fair to Welsh Government ministers and officials, they are aware of both of those, and discussions are probably more advanced on council tax reduction scheme than council tax losses. I think all treasurers and ministers and officials are waiting to see how much of it is temporary versus a permanent scarring for the year.
Okay, so we'll have something further on that in future meetings then, hopefully.
Correct.
Okay. Jeff Jones, you want to come in?
On the subject of finance, I'm glad Councillor Peter Jones actually brought it up. And what Peter Back actually said, we are losing revenue from, council tax and even car park fees and so on. I know it's been mentioned earlier with regards to utilising the capital equalisation reserve to actually pay for the, the field hospital up in Fabian Way. I know you're actually saying you're juggling the money around, but that money, I thought, was for the city deal to actually pay for the arena. So how are we going to put that money back? Are we going to have to borrow more monies at all in any way?
No, I think two actions really, Jeff, on that. Firstly, the health board are going to pay us back what we spent on the hospital. That's the first thing. So Mr. Smith will be extremely grumpy come the next few weeks if that money doesn't turn up in our account. But all signs at the moment are that they're ready to repay that, because of course Welsh Government have announced the fund to cover the costs of the surge and field hospitals anyway, so that they'll pay out of that fund. So the money that we spent on the hospital will come back and will go back into the capital equalisation reserve. The other thing, of course, is the capital equalisation reserve has been set up for a specific purpose, which is to help us with the future costs of repayment of borrowing for the arena. And again, hopefully at outturn, we will be able to give you an update in terms of further measures that we might be able to take to bolster that fund. But again, I can't share that with you until we get to the numbers on outturn and we're clear what they are.
Ben?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Can I bring Ben in, Jeff?
First? Sorry. Can I just clarify your point there? The last time when we had the scrutiny on the field hospital, we didn't have the assurance from the Welsh Government then with regards to, shall we say, repaying the money. And I think you actually mentioned in either the newspaper or the last full council meeting that there was going to be an interim payment from the Welsh Government. Has that money been received yet?
No, that payment is due at the end of the month. So Mr. Smith was just about to give you some further detail on that.
Yeah, let Ben come in now, Jeff.
Yes, so certainly on the latter point first, yes, we stumped money up in advance. There is £166 million national pot available, and the claim forms have been issued through the health boards and have come to us to be able to submit our claim, with the health boards expecting to recompense at the end of June. The earlier point is around that bit about the distinction I made between cash flow and resource cover. The capital equalisation reserve is a fully cash-backed reserve. We have chosen, on the advice I've given to Cabinet, to stump that up in cash terms now short term. When it is repaid, as the leader has indicated, in cash, it is then fully available as resource cover for the whole year. It's an example of where we have local flexibility and immediate muscle to deploy cash rapidly, more rapidly than the health board was able to, because of course they're not allowed to carry reserves. And I am very relaxed as your chief officer to give you advice that where it is appropriate to respond to emergencies, to draw on cash-backed reserves, I will recommend you use them. At the end of the day, reserves are not just sat there to look pretty, they are there for when there is a black swan event. We had a black swan event and I felt it reasonable and proportionate and worth the risk of stumping the cash up with an expectation that we get full resource cover. And as the leader has indicated, I expect full resource cover to be back by the end of June, and rest assured I will be extremely grumpy, but I have no reason to believe I will be grumpy come the end of the month.
Okay, Chris Holly. Chris, yeah.
There we are. Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we will be having a finance and performance scrutiny board apparently before the AGM in October, where I would possibly like to do some more work on this, Ben. But I think in the meantime, I understand that in England, one of the biggest problems that the councils have had is loss of income, and in many cases that figure has been much greater than proportionally to what we've been talked about. You say there's a £75 million pot in Wales for loss of income. Now the problem, as I see it, the loss of income just isn't about what has gone, but it's also what's coming up in the future. We're pretty obvious that the way in which the economy will start to grow after the break of this virus, or when we're allowed to let it grow, will be a lot more homegrown tourism. There'll be very little people traveling abroad because of fears or whatever, but that tourism growth and that tourism income, how we are going to actually capture a lot of that will be seen. But one of the things I am concerned about is when we do the recovery plan, can we look at how we can make more money out of or have more income from a tourist-based economy now, because I can't see there be anything else, because our manufacturing base and our retail base is slowly but surely collapsing.
Rob, do you want to do the political point? And I'll bring Ben in after.
Just very quickly on that. I mean, I think if you look at our strategy over the last few years, it has been very much based around improving the tourism offer and the visitor offer in Swansea, whether that be, via the new arena, which will come online, whether it's through things like the Skyline scheme or the redevelopment of the River Corridor. The tourism economy is hugely important to Swansea. You know that, Chris. It's in excess of 400 million a year. We are pushing Welsh Government heavily at the moment for some advice in terms of what the tourism economy will get in terms of help, and when we're likely to be able to announce any changes to the tourism economy locally. And again, we wait announcements on that. The other thing I would say, of course, is that it's hugely important for the seasonal businesses that depend as part of the tourism economy that they have some security, because in essence, they're facing 3 winters in a row, because they've had last winter, they've had a closed summer period to this point, and they'll be closed next winter. So that 3 winter hit, if you like, is already on the Welsh Government's horizon and planning. So all I would say is, yes, it's critical for our strategy in Swansea, and that's why the arena is so important, not just for bringing visitors to the city, but bringing visitors to the region. And it's a major part of our tourism offer going forward. But yes, I agree with you. Whatever we can do locally to support tourism, we will do. But I think we are going to need national support for this. It's part of the stuff that both UK and Welsh Government will have to help us with. Luckily, we've got pretty good relationship at the moment with Visit Wales. And of course, they are supporting us on a number of major schemes. So again, we are making sure that that support continues and isn't changed as part of the COVID response.
Okay. Ben?
Yeah, picking up on that point, I mean, part of this is about sequencing and timing, isn't it? To be fair to Welsh Government, they've only just issued the supplementary budget, and it was a record-breaking supplementary budget. And as you've seen from the leader's slides and my reference, we're likely to have our biggest ever in-year immediate flex of budget to the same extent. I remain as relaxed as I can be in the very short term, but to some extent we are otherwise such early days waiting for that wider impact. And I think the leader is right. It will depend on a much wider national macroeconomic response. It's too big an ask of individual authorities. Yes, we measure and put all bits in the mix, but at this early window where we've only had April in full and only just finished May, trying to forecast for the year and then forward past the spending review and into futures, all very relevant concerns to factor into the mix. But it is otherwise at the moment the equivalent of trying to measure a piece of string, an invisible string in a darkened cupboard. So it will all come in due course. And to some extent, I'm very practical and sequence-minded. So the first thing we will do is draft statement of accounts are done. Outturn, as the leader has referred to, will come. That will establish our base level of reserves and positions that we've got to be able to carry forward. Then the immediate policy response to stay solvent and safe in the short run, and all of those other bits come in due course. But it's probably a little bit early to be too firm on it. But I agree with the leader that an awful lot of it is going to rely on major macroeconomic decisions by both Welsh Government and UK Government, as well as the lobbying we can do and the bits we can do locally. You okay with that, Chris?
Yeah, I just it just concerns me that, you heard about the Millennium Centre losing £25 million and loads of staff being laid off, and we also know that the concerts and the various organisations involved in that have got massive problems with the over the next 18 months, 2 years, and also throughout cost in the Liberty Stadium. We know that if you organise concerts, you've got a 2-year window that you've got to look forward to and what have you, and that's the bit that concerns me. But we, as you say, we wait and see what the Welsh Government and the UK Government come up with, because it is going to be an extremely important part of our economy in the future.
Ben?
Thank you, Chair. I should have added, given Councillor Holly's first point, that of course the funding model in Wales is somewhat different to England, and it's still the case that Welsh local authorities on average are proportionally better funded in terms of revenue support grant and NNDR distributions of block grants. A number of my English counterpart colleagues, especially at the district level where they haven't got those upper tier functions like social care, the point that Chris makes is absolutely the case, that they are very, very severely impacted by dropping off of car park income and leisure venues. There is an advantage in being a unitary authority, and there is an advantage of being this side of the border. In my view, that's not a political statement, that's my view as a practical officer, seeing the tensions that I see playing out with my colleagues in England.
Okay. Right, we're going to move on now to outlook for the future challenges ahead. And I think Peter Jones has got a question about biodiversity and the natural environment. Peter.
Oh, yes, thank you, Chair. No meeting goes without a question from me on the natural environment, so perhaps that's to be expected. But one of the more pleasant consequences of COVID, if I can use that expression, has been growing public contact with, engagement with the natural environment as a consequence of walking more, cycling more, and so forth. I'm sure we've all seen it in our local parks, in the roads, less vehicle traffic, consequence of less air pollution, and so on and so forth. Now, the worry is that this is just going to be a temporary phenomenon, that as soon as whatever we mean by normality is resumed, so the cars will be running again, and nature will be neglected again, and so on and so forth. And of course, we've noticed, or I've noticed in particular, a reduction in grass cutting in our parks, which is welcome. I suggest anyone who go to Singleton Park and see for yourself the areas now being left to grow, to seed and so on, causing, I think, tremendous pleasure, I hope not only for humans, but for wildlife and bees and so forth. So I think there are issues around air quality, there are issues around active travel, and there are issues around green spaces and around weed management and cutting regimes. I'm just wondering whether there are any ongoing lessons that we're going to learn from what we've experienced over this otherwise dreadful period that might be of longer term benefit to the natural environment and biodiversity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for that. I mean, clearly there are. I mean, myself and the Chief Executive have already referenced the fact that we think that travel will be less in the future, certainly for things like regional meetings, and that we'll use technology to try and reduce the amount of unnecessary travel, so that we can still conduct the meetings that we would normally conduct. In terms of the environment and how the council promotes biodiversity now as well, I think we've got a second to none record so far in terms of the effort we're putting in to regreen our city centre, to create biodiversity hotspots and to encourage biodiversity across the county. I think when it comes to local choices around which areas get cut or left to encourage biodiversity, which areas get sprayed with in terms of weeds, etc., I think those will continue to be local choices that local members will advise on. Mark Thomas has been very clear. I think he's already put a note out to members. If people already, or communities already, would like to have less grass cutting of verges or to leave certain areas uncut, if they don't want weed spraying as many times during the year or at all, those are decisions that local representatives in communities can make. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all approach to this. I'd like members to make their own choices and reflect the views of their communities. But certainly, if communities want us to do less in terms of cutting in areas or weed spraying in areas, then if a community wants that, we're more than happy to work with them on that. So, that is certainly something we will do. And I have to say, Peter, I've become a convert to cycling, and I'm enjoying Cycle Route 43 at the moment in my area. And what's being created in terms of parks usage, I think, and the way in which the public and communities have re-embraced parks in a very big way over the recent months, I hope will continue, because I think it's a great thing to see. And certainly, Robert, I can tell you now, Robert Francis Davis is already making a claim for extra investment in parks across the county as part of his portfolio, and I'm sure that's something that we'll be able to support going forward.
Thank you.
Martin Nichols, can I just do Martin Nichols and Peter before you come back?
Yes.
Martin?
Yeah, just a brief point. Thank you, Chair. I think it's an opportune time. We were reaching the point, as Peter will know, where we were looking to finalise the draft action plan to respond to the climate change emergency approved by Council. Obviously, that took a little bit of a delay, unfortunately, over the last few months with other things taking priority. But actually, it has allowed us to review some of those actions that we perhaps were looking at to a narrower basis previously. So we've certainly talked about the emissions. We've certainly talked about what we'll be doing with our buildings in the future. And certainly the transportation emissions, which are significant, given what we are likely to do in terms of the operation for the council, are also likely to be able to be improved. But I think those wider benefits in terms of that biodiversity aspect and the investment in green spaces and public realm, also, Peter, perhaps we need to pick up a little bit more as part of that forward action plan. So I know there will be other forums where we will share that when that is ready, and I'm more than happy to do so.
Thank you.
I think, Peter, you're going to try and convene your panel meeting, aren't you? So you can look at this in more depth at that point there.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the Natural Environment Panel, for obvious reasons, hasn't met, in fact, since last December. And I'm very keen that as soon as possible we get ahead with a meeting when we will certainly review the impacts of COVID, but also associated matters. And I welcome the comments that have been made about biodiversity. I think we have got a good story to tell here in Swansea. The one tricky issue is air quality, which remains a difficulty, not least because of the contribution that road transport in particular makes, and people's love of cars and so on and so forth. And that's going to be a tricky one. But those are issues we can discuss in another place. Thank you.
Okay, I'm trying to wind this up before 6 o'clock. So I know a number of councillors have got to leave to go to another meeting. So Joe Hale, you want to come in? And I'll bring Terry Hennigan after that.
Yeah, cheers. Just quickly, could I ask the leader if he ever does envisage seeing Swansea having a congestion charge? Bearing in mind, I see Peter laughing. Bearing in mind, that the only trunk, well, the second trunk road in Wales is outside our front door here, and it's at a standstill, isn't it? 5 days a week. Well, it used to be. Now you can stroll across Fabian Way. It's an absolute pleasure to walk to SA1. But could depending on what Peter's team comes back with, his scrutiny team comes back with, if there was, say, maybe a one road congestion charge, do you think that would be sustainable?
Do you want to cut this quickly, Rob? Are we going to charge people to come into Swansea? I think you're muted, are you, Rob?
Has he gone?
No, Rob's muted. Rob is muted.
Sorry, Joe. No, my short answer to that is no. I've always believed in the carrot rather than the stick, and I'm very keen to see UK and Welsh government invest in the metro network and provide other forms of travel and options for travel in the region. I would much prefer active travel investments to go forward so people can use bikes and other stuff. And again, if we can get it right on a mixed and balanced home working programme across ourselves, major employers and other employees in the city, then I mean, some of the estimates are that we'll reduce traffic on the roads by 30% just by doing that. Good. So I think a range of other ways of doing it. I think, and again, I don't want to put barriers up to people coming to Swansea. I wanted to make it easier for them to come in ways which don't damage the environment, rather than go for the stick of fining them for trying to come into the city. So it's that would be my approach.
Fair point. Thanks for that. Can I bring Terry Hennigan in now on volunteers?
Yeah, a huge amount of volunteers came on board over the last couple of months to help the City County of Swansea and the residents. I did ask in the pre-meeting, if there was a specific list available. I'm aware of Swansea CVS involvement, but others came on board directly through the City County of Swansea. It'd be good if we have still got that list, not on the political side of it, but for them to be known as Friends of City County of Swansea. And further down the line is a possibility, if they want to keep volunteering, litter picking is something that could be utilised by us as a council.
Terry, on that, I understand that is already ongoing in many areas, as you say, and they are a great asset to us. Lots of areas do community litter picks and community volunteering for litter. I understand Martin is working and his team are working at the moment to look at how we can support those groups to do that safely during COVID. But yeah, it's been something that we've done in many areas for many years, but it's something we're happy to continue to support, Terry.
Yeah. Although I must add to that, the unions might have something to say about it.
Well, it adds to the services we provide, Terry. It doesn't undermine them, and I think you know, where communities want to get together, as the chief executive said earlier, and we can harness that community spirit to do more good than we were able to do with our resources. I think that's something we should encourage.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, I'm going to wind this up now because I know it's coming up to 6 o'clock. I think we want to come back at the next scrutiny committee and look at this again, and particularly start looking at the recovery plans, which I'm hoping will be a bit more advanced in a month's time. So can I thank Rob and the various officers for contributing today and answering the questions. It's been a very useful session, and I hope that we've all learned something from it, and I hope it's helped you as well, Rob, as part of this process.
No, appreciate that, Chair. We will definitely come back with the outline of the recovery plans as soon as we can.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. In terms of the agenda, I'm going to suggest that we circulate by email in terms of any letters we're going to send, and we'll deal with that by email if that's okay with Bridge. And then so we can, rather than to prolong this meeting into a discussion as to what might go into those letters. And then the next item on the agenda is in fact the scrutiny letters, which have already been circulated as part of the agenda. So I'm just asking committee if they can agree they're happy with those scrutiny letters at all. There's a number of them which were circulated as part of the agenda. I take it everyone's happy with those unless someone says anything to the contrary. No, okay, thank you. The next meeting is actually Tuesday the 14th of July at 4 p.m. We're going to have a pre-meeting on the Monday at 4 p.m. And I think we'll most probably be revisiting, I think, COVID at that point, where we're at, start looking at recovery plans, start looking at what the level of services are. So can I thank everybody for being part of this meeting? It's been a very useful meeting, very helpful. If anybody wants to hang around to chat afterwards, that's fine. But I'm going to call the meeting to a close now. And as I said, we'll deal with the letters to the leader as by email, as I think the most efficient way of doing that. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you all for coming. And I'm now closing the meeting as of now. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.